Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. We begin what you might call the scientific program, I guess, now. I cannot see any of you, by the way, because these lights are so bright. And I was told that the main part of the audience will be 300 people who will go and spread our words of wisdom to the rest of Spain and Europe, and from there to the world about the circular economy and technology and what's happening in the labor market. So I will focus. It's a little bit of a kind of instructional presentation, if you like. I will focus on the impact of innovation on the labor market, which is the topic that I was given. And I will talk in two parts. In the first one, I'm going to talk generally about the impact of new technology on labor markets. And in the second part, I'm going to talk more specifically about the circular economy. I did prepare slides for you, but all I can see there is a picture of myself instead of my much better looking slides than myself, I'm afraid. So I have no idea. I can talk without them, of course, but it would be very helpful if you could see them. All right. Well, let's begin then talking about the impact of new technology on the labor market. New technology is very important, of course, as it was emphasized by previous speakers as well, because it brings productivity growth, and productivity growth is the process that underpins sustained economic growth, which is what our objective is. I guarantee you I didn't have music in my slides. This is an optional extra. Now, when we look at productivity performance across the OECD countries, the industrial countries of the world, you might get the impression that the United States is doing much better than Europe, for example, and the rest of us. But the only reason that's the case is that Americans work longer hours. In Europe, we also like to take our leisure. So if you look at how productive we are per hour, then you find something that is worrying for Europe, especially for us Southern Europeans, because I'm also a Southern European like most of the rest of you. I originate in Cyprus. I'm of Greek origin. And what we see is that Germany and the other Northern European countries, especially Scandinavians and the smaller countries around Germany, are growing faster. They're growing as fast. Their productivity per hour is growing as fast as in the United States. When you look in the south, and in my slides I did use Spain as an example in the south, you will see a gap opening up and widening since 1990 between Spain and Germany, for example. And of course, when you look at Greece, my own country, or Italy, you'll see the gap widening even more. That I find a rather worrying aspect of developments in Europe, because we all belong to the same market, the single market of the European Union. We belong to the same currency, most of us. And yet there are widening differentials, whereas the whole idea of European integration through the single currency and the single market was that we were all going to come together. Something needs to be done about that before the system just implodes. It breaks in from within. There is a division between Southern and Northern Europe that is developing when you look at long-term trends. Now, another feature of long-term trends is the new technology. Where does the new technology come from? And of course, it comes from R&D, research and development done by governments, universities, and businesses. When you think about R&D, when you look at the statistics of R&D, you will say we must be doing more, because there are amazing things happening in technology now through the digital technologies, robots, artificial intelligence. I mean, I've worked a lot on those, and I've talked on other fora about them. They are technologies that should be embraced because they're going to improve our standards of living, but we have to be careful how we embrace them. The previous speaker, Kingsberg, I think his name was, from the United Nations, spoke quite a lot about it. I have to say I'm not as pessimistic about them as he was sounding. I think things will be better. They could be even better. And again, when you look at that technology and are we doing enough research and development to bring it into our labor markets, again, you can see a very clear division between Northern Europe on the one hand, with Germany doing as much as the Asian tigers, which are South Korea and Japan currently, and China catching up, and the United States. And then at the other extreme, you see Southern European countries, Spain, Greece, and Italy. To give you an example, Spain is spending about 1% of its GDP on R&D. South Korea is spending 4%, 4.5%. Germany is spending something like 3%, just under 3%. So we have Northern Europe spending more than twice as much as we're spending in Southern Europe. And if you see where we are now, where we need to close gaps, and yet there is more being invested in new technology in the northern countries, then that gives you warning bells about the future as well. Okay, having said that about, having depressed you sufficiently, I guess, because I'm telling you, we're never going to catch up with Germany if we carry on the way we are now. What can we do? Well, at least they lost the World Cup in football, whereas... Although, sorry, I forgot about Spain. I thought you were going to move ahead. But at least you were in it, whereas Greece never got anywhere near it. So anyway, let's now switch to the labor market and see what new technology... I'm standing up for Belgium, by the way, just to support small countries. Let's look at now what new technology is doing to labor markets. Now, the problem with new technology and the way they impact on labor markets is that when we get the new technology, it doesn't affect all sectors of the economy uniformly. It affects some sectors better than others. If you look currently at robotics, they're obviously getting much more into manufacturing than they're getting into the service sector. And that necessitates a change in employment patterns across the economy that will both reflect and offset the impact of technology. In other words, if a sector gets robots doing the work, then obviously the workers doing that work will leave, but the output of the sector will grow. Now those workers have to go into the sectors that are not doing robotics so that they can produce more in those sectors that need labor, and the output of the two sectors goes up together. The output of the robotics sector goes up because robots are doing the work. The output of the other one goes up because now it's employing more workers. That's what we call in economics the structural transformation of the economy. Now, if you look historically, where do we see technology being introduced? Well, first of all, we see it in agriculture. Agriculture at the beginning of the 20th century was employing about 50% of workers in the United States, and it was employing about 60 to 70% in Europe. Now it's employing below 5%. What happened to all those workers who left agriculture? Well, they went into industry. There was a lot of job creation in industry. There was huge expansion of manufacturing in the 20th century to produce all these electrical goods. The main innovation at that time was electricity. And we got the big growth in industrial countries. But after that came new technologies, automation, and employment in industry started declining, which is what we have now. And all those workers are going into service sectors where we don't have the automation, we don't have enough capital stock. The biggest innovation at the time, as I mentioned, is electricity. By the way, I have to say as an aside, partly to show you that I'm not as pessimistic as previous speakers, I don't think robots and artificial intelligence will be as important as electricity. I think electricity is the biggest innovation we've had in its impact on labor markets. I mean, just think what you can do without electricity and what you're doing now. Well, I guarantee you even 100 years from now, we're not going to be around to check it, so I can just claim it. No empirical test of my proposition. I don't think robots will be as evident as electricity is now. I mean, look, I cannot even see you because of electricity, whereas I don't think there will be robots here blocking us from this kind of thing. So now, why was electricity so important? Well, the reason it was so important is that it led to the production of all those domestic appliances, for example, and destroyed the entire domestic sector, which was a big employment sector at the time. It helped a service sector as well. It disrupted labor markets much more than the current artificial intelligence will disrupt labor markets. Another huge innovation was the motor car, the internal combustion engine. Now we're going to have driverless cars. I don't think they're going to have as much of an impact on the labor market as the motor car had. I mean, just think, before the motor car, we used to move around on horses. How many horses do you see in the street now, and carriages? They've all gone. So that's part of the structural transformation of the economy. Now, what we are seeing now is a continuous decline in industrial employment. Again, I had a beautiful graph to show you, but I can't describe it to you. The United States is down to about 15% of its labor force in industry. Germany is down to about 25%, but they are falling. And when you look at Spain, again, you see the plight of the European South in that just before the financial crisis, Spain was employing about 30% of its population in industry. Now it's employing about 20% of its population in industry. So it lost 10% of employment in industry just because of the financial crisis. Those jobs will never come back. Don't believe President Trump that he's going to bring them back to the United States. They just don't come back. Once we lose industrial jobs in our industrialized countries, the OECDs, they've gone forever. We should look at what new technology we can bring, what new jobs to bring in, not to restore the old ones. I mean, I'm sure it's something you heard before. Anyway, now, let's look at the disruption that the digital revolution is bringing to labor markets. What does it do? Well, just think of computers with sophisticated software. Who is using those computers in their place of work? It's usually highly educated people, highly skilled people who are using them. So highly skilled people benefit from the digital technologies that are being introduced now. Now, what about routine jobs that were done at middle level? Think of a typist. That was a routine job. When I first got my job at the London School of Economics, we had a typing pool. We used to write longhand, give it to the typing pool, it would come back typed. Now you have voice recognition. You talk to a computer and it's all typed. All those jobs have gone. What the digital technology does is to hurt the middle range of the skills distribution, the routine jobs that can be programmed on a computer. Now look at the very unskilled jobs below, janitors, cleaners, people working in domestic service generally, all the people, sort of security people are there. I mean, jobs that don't need high levels of education, where computers don't do anything for them. They are still doing the same jobs as they were doing before. Now, if you think of the implications for that, for inequality, you will see that they're rather serious again, because the digital revolution is going to benefit high incomes, highly skilled people. It's going to hurt middle incomes, and it's not going to do much for lower incomes, which will remain stagnant. And therefore, we are going to see an increase in inequality. We're already seeing it in the United States and Germany. It's coming everywhere, and that's where governments need to take action. Otherwise, that will become non-sustainable. Now, what's going to happen in the structure of jobs? Well, first of all, I do believe that the digital technologies that are being introduced now will free up a lot of our time. And we're very good in Europe at taking longer vacations when time is freed up by machinery. Unfortunately, Americans are not good. They are still taking only 2 weeks a year in vacation. But in Europe, we've gone from 2 to 4 to 6 now. So I do expect the leisure industry to grow a lot. Catering, hotels, travel. It's an industry that is on the growth. So a lot of jobs will be created in that sector. Like the challenge when it comes to that will be, for example, taxi drivers are losing their jobs to automation. What governments need to do and what the education system needs to do is how to, and society actually above all, is how to help them make the transformation into the leisure industry, become hotel employees, restaurant employees, that kind of job. That's the kind of transformation that we're going to see, moving away from the programmable jobs to others. Another sector that is going to grow enormously is the health and care sector, because what are we in Europe? We're wealthy, and North America, of course, in the OECD as a whole. We're wealthy societies, but we're aging societies. Now, wealthy societies usually spend a lot more on health and care than less wealthy societies. It's a bit of a luxury, to get especially care. If you have a back pain and you are poor, you just stay home until it goes away. If you live in a wealthy society, you go to a specialist who will give you all kinds of massage and what do they call them, the things they do to your back. And those are specialist jobs, in fact. And we're aging, and aging people need care and health much more. So when you look at the distribution of employment across our labor markets, okay, we're going to lose a lot to the new technologies, to robots, but there will be job creation in health, in the leisure industry, in domestic service. You won't believe how many dog walkers, professional dog walkers there are in London, for example. You go into London Park during the day and you see people actually working, training dogs and grooming them and all that kind of thing. It's the kind of thing that wealthy societies, the kind of jobs that they create in the service sector that cannot be automated. You cannot trust a robot to walk your dog into the park. So I'm not pessimistic about these new technologies. New jobs will come. Now, let's talk more specifically, the second part of my talk, about the circular economy. Now, by the circular economy, we should view it as an innovation, that it will also require restructuring of jobs. New jobs will be created in all sectors of the economy concerned with sort of reuse, remanufacture, recycle, and all that. And some jobs will be destroyed. For example, those jobs in the fossil fuel processing. There's been very little research into the type of jobs that will be needed in the circular economy. I mean, we talk that it will be job creation, but we don't really know what kind of job creation there will be, other than the obvious ones of reducing pollution and switching energy sources from fossil fuels to renewables. Now, there are some OECD estimates about the jobs that will be created, but they're concerned more the energy sources. The OECD research is focused on energy. And it's what's known as the greening of jobs. How do we take brown jobs and turn them into green jobs? Now, that restructuring will be rather small. It might be 1 or 2% of the labor force, not more than that. Now, what is that going to do to productivity as conventionally measured? I think in the short term, the transformation to greener forms of production, it will reduce productivity. So if you use conventional measures of well-being, you're going to say that what we're doing is not good for the economy. However, I think that's a very narrow-minded view. I think we should abandon using just income per head as our objective by which we value the performance of the economy. We should be thinking more in terms of longer-term objectives, the state of the environment, sustainability. If we just focus on the growth per head that we are looking now, we're not going to get a sustainable growth economy. And that's the way that I'm going to talk. That's the focus I'm going to talk. I'm not going to focus on income per head, but on the wider issues of sustainability. Now, I'm going to use as an example the greening of jobs. In other words, how to reduce pollution and what does that do to the labor market. Now, the creation of green jobs will depend on whether final consumers, society in other words, are prepared to spend more on green type goods than now. This was emphasized by previous speakers as well, that what's important is that society should learn to demand more of the output of green jobs. I can give you an example. You could install electricity for your heating at home, or you could install solar panels. Electricity is easier to do, the grid is there. It's probably cheaper to install, but if you do care about these things, if you want to encourage the green job creation, and governments should do it, you should go and buy the solar panels and put them in your house, because that way you encourage the solar panel industry. That's what I mean, that is the right demand. Now for that, we need policies from central government, because it's not going to come on its own. Obvious policies are carbon taxes, more social awareness of benefits of greener economies for society as a whole. The implications of these taxes for jobs is that the jobs in the fossil-based forms of energy become more expensive. The company needs to pay more tax on them, and therefore it gives them incentives to switch to greener forms of production. And the government is going to have some revenue, which it can then spend on improving the job creation on the circular economy and the green economy. Now, if we do that, how big is it going to be in our economies? Well, there's still no consensus definition of what is a green job or a brown job, so it's rather difficult to measure it. But as I said before, if you look at the economy as a whole, it's not going to cause much disruption. It's going to be a maximum of 2% of employment. Some sectors, like the production of gas, coal, fossil fuel-based electricity, could lose about 40% of employment, but those are not labor-intensive sectors. The labor-intensive sectors are the ones about renewables, solar energy, wind energy, and circular economy. Those are labor-intensive sectors, and those are going to attract, there's going to be a lot of job creation in those sectors. Okay, let me just repeat that. There will be a small number of jobs destroyed because they're what you might call brown jobs, up to 2% of employment. There will be more jobs being created in the green sectors if you have the incentives. Their productivity will not be as high, but don't hold that against them. Look at their long-term benefits to the society. Now, what about skills? Well, we're going to need more different kinds of skills in the circular economy. You know, people will be doing things that we're not doing now. And there is a two-way interaction of that. You know, you need at the same time to give the incentives to create the green jobs and give incentives for companies to train the workers in those new jobs. If you don't do them simultaneously, then you're going to fail. And that's not very easy to do, because you have to decide how you're going to provide the training. I believe it should start in school, in high school, just in the way that we have in the way that we teach geography and history in schools. There should be courses about the environment and ultimately circular economy, but let's begin with the environment because we know more about. Then there should be, once you do that, then they'll acquire the skills. There should be university courses on environmental skills, you know, how to preserve the environment, and from there you can go and get a job in a company that is focused on green job creation. If you do it that way, then you're also providing the social education, if you like, about the benefits of having the greener forms of production. Together with that, we need to have flexible labor markets, because there will be some readjustment, you know, not very big, but rigid labor market institutions could frustrate these attempts. There is a tendency throughout the OECD for more flexible labor markets. You know, as you probably know, Spain had the most rigid labor market of all, but it is becoming more flexible in small steps. I don't think that's going to be a barrier. I think the bigger objective that we have to follow is how to start education early on about the benefits of environmental preservation and the skills needed for the jobs in the green sectors of the economy. Now, the other thing that I was going to say that would be very important is that I mentioned that the government is going to have some revenue from carbon taxes and other forms of taxation, of course. I mentioned that there is very little R&D being done in these forms. It seems to be obvious to me that the government should subsidize R&D more heavily, or it should do its own R&D in the circular economy and the greening of jobs. We know some things about the greening of jobs, and that's why I talk more about that. We know almost nothing about the circular economy. I mean, we know that it involves reuse, but I mean, what does it mean that we should stop buying clothes in new, we should stop buying clothes that say pure new wool behind and go to second-hand shops? I don't know. I mean, it obviously helps because it will increase the reuse, but there are some shocking statistics that we need research on how to reduce the waste. For example, in London, from what I was reading, a motor car is used only 8% of the time. The other 92% of the time is sitting idle on the street. In my case, 98% of the time is sitting idle in the street. That's obviously waste when you say reuse and share more. Now, it's not easy to think how you can share motor cars. There are some schemes on club use beginning to emerge, but they are not used at all. They haven't been taken up by the public. That's the kind of research that governments could do, and they could use the revenue from carbon taxes to be doing that research, how to increase the usage of products. So altogether, I'm very close to the end. You'll be pleased to hear. I do have final recommendations which summarize everything I said before, that the circular economy will require incentives to final consumers. That's where we should begin. Education of the public, start with high school, introduce courses into the high school curriculum that are concerned with that. The labor market requirements such as training and job switching are not more challenging than normal structural change in the economy from new technology. In fact, I think greening our economies will not be as challenging as when electricity came along or as when robots are coming along. It will be easier to bring the skills that are needed in the greening of the economy. But governments need to provide incentives to final consumers and producers and develop training programs for workers. And this urgent priority should be given to the subsidization of research and development in the circular economy, because it will not happen if you leave it to private sector initiative. The private sector will not have an incentive to do research on the greening of the labor market. That's something that has to come from government. It has to come from universities in the first instance. Thank you very much for listening.